Alright, another historical fiction manga video. This one will be about some that are historically set outside of Japan, mainly in the Europe-ish area, and these have varying degrees of historical accuracy with their settings, time periods, and then some of them do actually have historical figures, or at least characters based on historical figures. And we'll start with the one that is presently most relevant, as the anime just started airing, Chi, Chikyu no Undo ni Tsuite, or Orb, on the movements of the Earth. And the story of Chi is the story of heliocentrism, the idea that the Earth, and other planets, revolve around the sun. And I think it's also a story about the innate human nature and drive to discover the truth, no matter what the cost. And the idea of heliocentrism, or the theory of heliocentrism, was proposed, rediscovered, whatever, by Copernicus in early 15th century Poland. And in this manga, we have a setting of early 15th century Poland. Now, there are some little bits that are not super historically accurate, but that can be forgiven. It's a story that's made to entertain people. So the story of Chi is either an alternate theory of how the idea of heliocentrism was discovered, or it could simply be this is how the theory of heliocentrism arrived with Copernicus. We don't know for now, but it is entirely possible that we could still get involvement of Copernicus, which would be cool to see. And this takes place before the Protestant Revolution, so all of Christianity is under the Catholic Church, which in reality and in the story is against the idea of heliocentrism, as their theory places the Earth at the center of the universe because they believe that God intended for that because God made humanity and they're special. So they weren't big fans of the theory of heliocentrism. Now, in reality, they didn't really do a lot to crack down on it, as opposed to in the manga where there are very harsh punishments for going against the theory that the church had. That's one big discrepancy between reality and the manga. Initially, I was not a fan of the ending until I looked into the history of things a bit more, and now I think it's actually a really great ending. And after watching the first few episodes of the anime, I think it may even take the story above and beyond that of the manga, so I think consuming either media is something I wholeheartedly recommend. I just think that the anime has done an amazing job of portraying like the night sky, space, and the stars. So yeah, 100% recommend this one. And you can even just watch it nice and easy. I think it's just on Netflix, so that's great. Vinland Saga. This is a story of revenge, acceptance, and growth, mainly the personal kind, set during the Viking conquest of England, at least at first. And in this, we get some real historical figures, such as Canute and Svein. I really liked what was done with Canute's classic, historical quote, in which he commands the waves to do his bidding, and then obviously they don't. In real life, it was an expression of, him showing, obviously he knows he's not all-powerful. God's power is much stronger. He can't command the waves. Now, a lot of people thought that this was him thinking he had magical powers and was delusional, and that's not really how it went down, and the manga covers it in the proper way, and I really appreciated how it was portrayed. And it also fits really well within the themes of the story. Maybe that's a little bit spoilery, but I don't think so, because it doesn't really have much effect on the story. And this is all about sticking to your ideals and the ideas of what are strength and justice, and the mangaka really imparting his own ideas of that into this work. And their historical parts really portray just how wildly widespread the Viking conquests went, and how many different cultures and kingdoms and empires were impacted and involved during that era. All the way from Iceland, Greenland, maybe even North America, down to the Turkey, Greece, Ottoman Empire, Byzantine Empire area. It's crazy. Overall, this is a really impactful work, and I think it's something that all people should read, or at least watch. Seasons 1 and 2, I think, are both on Netflix, so it shouldn't be super hard to do so. But the historical setting is mainly just an avenue for the mangaka to espouse his ideals of what true strength and true justice are, and tell an amazing story of personal growth. Next we got Isaku, or Isak. I don't think it's Isaac because there's 2 S's and only 1 A, but whatever. This is a story of revenge that takes place in Europe, more specifically the Holy Roman Empire mainly, taking place during the 30 Years' War. This is a very fascinating time in Europe where the Holy Roman Empire, which was made up of just an insane number of different states, was largely just at war with itself. It started as a civil war between Catholics and Protestants, each with outside support, like Spain with the Catholics and Sweden and the Netherlands with the Protestants, and it really just evolved and took 30 whole years to figure everything out. But all of that is really just a backdrop. The kicker is that this is a story of revenge involving two samurai from Japan, obviously, and they face off against each other in copious different battles of this war, real or fictional battles, I might add. It's a bit exaggerated, it's manga, but it's not so far that I can't suspend my disbelief for most of this stuff. You know, it is technically possible, or it was, that Japanese could have ended up over there. I don't think there's any that we know of that were in the Holy Roman Empire or in the 30 Years' War, but I think some Japanese had ended up over in Europe in the early Tokugawa shogunate period. Our main character is trying to track down and kill his enemy here for things I won't mention. I'm sure you find out pretty early on, but I don't think I need to spoil it. Suffice it to say, he has at least two good reasons. And both our main Japanese samurai characters are excellent marksmen, which really helps to justify their outsized impacts on battles to the point where it isn't impossible to believe that these two people can have such a profound impact on the battles that they're fighting in, especially with the way that guns were used in battles of the time period as compared to more recent times. And they're also using some more advanced weaponry, so they have better accuracy than the guns being used in Europe at the time. There's a bit of religious intrigue in this, as not all Protestants agreed on everything, and the whole war was over religion. There's a little bit of period drama. It's probably not super accurate on either front, but it's not super, out of the realm of possibility, unrealistic. It's cool to see this war and this period of time in manga. A lot of crazy changes were taking place during this time period. And maybe this manga won't always just be a story of revenge. Maybe it'll end up like Vinland Saga. Maybe he'll find his place in Europe, and maybe we just get to explore even more of Europe in that period, though we've already seen lots of parts of the HRE, and I think maybe some of the Netherlands. Overall, I just think it's a really cool manga, and I recommend it, though I'm only 40 chapters in, because I'm not reading it legally. Otoyomegatari, or A Bride's Story. This one is an exploration of the cultures of the steppe, just before the Russian Empire annexed, seized, conquered them, whatever you want to call it, in the late 19th century. And this area would be all the stands, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, probably North Pakistan, maybe parts of Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and then parts of Iran. We end up getting into a little bit of Turkey. I consider this maybe the most underappreciated region in the world. It looks super beautiful. There's so many different nomadic cultures, and they have such a rich history. The Silk Road went through here. I think maybe I forgot to mention Uzbekistan, and that's a big part of the Silk Road. But this takes place long after all that major Silk Road stuff had ended. The way we explore all these different cultures of the steppe is through different brides' stories. So we cover a lot of different characters, and we go back and sometimes revisit them, and we get windows into how marriage works in different cultures of the steppe, and how everyday life works sometimes, how gender roles work, and also we're also seeing a little bit of the historical side of the Russians are coming. They're starting to encroach on the nomadic territories of the peoples of the steppe, and how that's starting to also affect their cultures. And not all of these steppe peoples are nomadic, and not all of the story takes place in the steppe. There's Caspian Sea peoples. We end up in Turkey for a minute. Right now, I think the story is back in England, but that's mainly just a vessel for storytelling. And maybe the greatest part of this manga is how amazing the artwork is, and without all that amazing artwork, we couldn't tell necessarily about a lot of the parts of the culture, because it's important to see the different embroidery and designs that are so important to each of these different cultures and how they identify themselves. I just really, really love this manga, and I know that the mangaka has been to the region in order to further her depth of research. And I think this one is the one that's probably the most accurate to what's being portrayed So like period piece, historical, like attire and implements and all that type of thing. But we're not getting any real people, which is fine. We'll call it a period piece, a pretty accurate period piece. And I recommend this to the fullest. It's not what it sounds like with A Bride Story, and it's not what it looks like with an adult woman marrying a male child. It's about a lot more, and that also is just a vessel to explain how the culture works and how the gender dynamics and coming of age in all these different cultures work. Before we're done, here's a couple of bonus-ish ones that I won't cover quite as succinctly for reasons / them not being quite on theme. Then we've got Kamigami no Itaraki, or The Summit of the Gods. And this one is fully fictional, except for the parts that are almost totally truthful, that we learn about the history of Everest and also some other mountains and their climbs and summitings of them. Otherwise, this is just a pretty improbable story, and also it was written in the 90s and set in the 90s, so I don't know how historical that is. The main idea here is, what if we found George Mallory's camera so that we could learn for once and for all if he and Andrew Irvine truly reached the summit of Everest in that first attempt at climbing it in 1924. So we have an adventure journalist from Japan, and he's searching for the camera in Nepal, but that's really just the wrapping for our story of another Japanese guy who's there in Nepal and improbably is doing all this crazy mountaineering stuff and climbing Everest as well. But the part that really interests us here is we learn a lot about that first attempt at a summit of Mount Everest by Irvine and Mallory. And this manga was originally written as a book in 1998 and then turned into a manga starting in 2000. You can tell sometimes it's a book adaptation because it can get a little awkward and dialogue heavy. But wildly, they found George Mallory's body between when the book came out and when the manga came out in 1999. But they didn't find a camera, and there's only circumstantial evidence that they reached the top. Like, he didn't have a picture of his family that supposedly he would have left on top, but obviously he could have just dropped that. And where they found him gave them no special indication of whether or not they had reached the top. And we're actually on the cutting edge of history here, as on October 10th of this year, they just found Andrew Irvine's detached foot in a boot. Still no camera though, so it doesn't really tell us anything one way or the other. Overall, I enjoyed the story a lot, and I thought the message was kind of cool. The landscape art was very good. Just don't know how much of a historical manga it is. It just gives really good historical info about mountains. That's mostly truthful. And there's also a French, quote-unquote, anime movie, and it looks really good, honestly. I really want to watch it, and I don't know why I haven't yet. And that's called Le Sommet des Dieux, The Summit of the Gods. Madame Petti is a shoujo that looks like it was made in the 90s or even earlier, but it was actually made more recently than I would have thought, in 2012. And this one hops all over the world in the 20s. So we go on the Orient Express, so we start out in the Ottoman Empire in Constantinople, then we end up in Paris, eventually we go to London and other parts of England, and lastly parts of India. I think we even end up in America at some point. There's scenes that take place in the past in Japan, because that's where our main character's from. If you're a shoujo fan, then maybe you'll be into this one. I would say the description of it is a bit misleading. It isn't quite a murder mystery, but I thought that the story in and of itself was pretty good. The problem for me, which may just have been a problem with me not reading the official translation, was that it didn't really develop the leads super well, and that really set in that it was doing the shoujo trope I am very much not a fan of, where the man is just constantly forcing himself on the woman, and then all of a sudden she just randomly is in love with him, and it's weird to me. Otherwise, I thought it was cool, going all over the world, roaring 20s stuff, and moving on. And Kusuriya no Hitorigoto, or the Apothecary Diaries. And there's no real history here. It's your classic Chinese Forbidden Palace / court drama with some big twists. I feel like they all have those. But it's got good mystery elements as well as good main characters. Overall, it's a great story. But what's interesting for us here is to see the different applications of medicinal herbs and other ancient remedies, and to see the understanding of chemicals they had back in that time, whatever pseudo-ancient China time we're in. And for me, it's similar to Nobunaga no Chef, which I'll cover another time, in portraying historical methods for doing things that we do nowadays. Like in Nobunaga no Chef, it's all about how it's possible to cook dishes, or at least similar dishes in the past as to how we cook them now. In the Apothecary Diaries, it's all about using ancient medicine, ancient remedies to treat illnesses, poison, whatever, in a completely different way than we know now. But a lot of the times, the science is there, they just don't necessarily know it. And it also deals with forensics a little bit too. I just think it's cool seeing how ancient methods deal with the same problems, and seeing how they came up with or how they use some of these solutions is very cool. But other than that, it's just a nice story. So initially I planned on talking about chi a long time ago. I was fortunate enough to go to Japan, and then I went to the Tenkyu Space Center Museum, whatever, at the Tokyo Dome area. And that was in like January 2023 that I went, I think. Then I got back and I was like, cool, I'll talk about that and the special chi event they had going on. But I think the event was going to be over anyways, but it would be cool to send people there because it was a really cool museum. Then I found out that in March, the museum had already closed, and that kind of like put me out of wanting to just make the chi video. And then I read Kamigami no Itadaki, so I was like, okay, maybe I can talk about history in some way, because I had also been reading Otoyo Megatari, and also I had been reading, or I'd been watching Vinland Saga, and I had read Message to Adolf, but eventually I got too busy. But I want to show you this cool shirt I got at the Tenkyu Space Museum in Japan.